There are moments when a family argument feels loud but harmless. And then there are moments when paperwork appears and the room changes shape. This was one of those moments. Mara Ellison had spent 5 years in military intelligence, learning to recognize threats before they were named. The danger waiting for her that afternoon in the Blue Ridge foothills did not wear a uniform. It wore concern. What followed was her voice. I heard the word affidavit before I saw the paper. Doctor. Adrian Kessler had his leather folder open on the dining room table, right where my grandfather used to spread out seed catalogs. My mother stood beside him, arms folded, nodding like this was a planning session for a fundraiser. Grant leaned against the counter. Calm. Too calm. Kessler tapped the document with 2 fingers. Based on what I've observed today, I'm prepared to file an affidavit for involuntary evaluation. I didn't sit down. You observed me for 8 minutes. That's enough to document agitation, defensive posture, and impaired judgment following combat exposure. My mother stepped closer. Mara. Honey, this is just to help you stabilize. It's only a 72-hour psychiatric hold, Grant added. It's temporary. We're trying to protect you. I looked at the paper. You can't just take someone from their home. Kessler's voice stayed smooth. Under North Carolina statute, I can submit a sworn affidavit to a magistrate. If approved, law enforcement can transport you for evaluation. It doesn't require your consent. He reached for his phone. That was the moment I understood they had already rehearsed this. Grant didn't look surprised. Lydia didn't look worried. They looked ready. I stepped back from the table. You were planning to file an emergency petition for temporary guardianship too. Weren't you silence? Grant's jaw tightened. If it becomes necessary, I felt something settle inside me. Not panic, not anger, just clarity. I revoked the durable general power of attorney 6 weeks ago. Kessler paused. Grant blinked. What are you talking about? I'm the successor trustee of Thomas Whitaker's trust. You exceeded the scope of the power of attorney. You diverted trust distributions. My mother shook her head. You're confused. I'm not confused. I hired Daniel Rourke 6 months ago. Kessler lowered the phone slightly. You retained counsel. Yes. I reached into my bag and set my tablet on the table. Before you call anyone, you should know the forensic accounting report is complete. Grant's voice dropped. Mara, don't escalate this. You already escalated it. The air in that room tightened. For a second, no one moved. We have seen confrontations before, but this one was quiet in a different way. Kessler straightened his jacket. If there's legal counsel involved, I suggest we pause. Grant's face changed. Not rage. Something closer to calculation unraveling. You think this is about money? He asked. I know it is. I tapped the screen and Daniel Rourke's face appeared. Doctor. Rourke began evenly. Before you submit any affidavit, you should be aware that any action taken without sufficient medical basis may expose all parties to liability. Kessler didn't respond immediately. Grant finally looked at me, not as his daughter, but as an obstacle. You would do this to your own family. I'm not doing anything. I'm correcting a breach of fiduciary duty. No one reached for the phone again, and that was the first time I realized they hadn't expected resistance. 6 months before I returned to North Carolina, I was sitting in a plywood operations trailer halfway across the world, staring at a grainy spreadsheet on a satellite connection. It was supposed to be routine quarterly trust distribution reports, farm operating expenses, and brokerage summaries. Instead, the data suggested a strategic leak. The discrepancies were not catastrophic. They were surgical. A distribution intended for reinvestment was categorized as an operational adjustment. Withdrawals appeared without corresponding invoices. A transfer labeled equipment replacement lacked a vendor profile. Patterns repeat, that is the first rule of intelligence work. These withdrawals had escalated from $10,000 to increments of $25,000. Quiet, consistent, predatory. I contacted Daniel Rourke. I did not offer theories. I sent raw data. He called back within 24 hours. Mara, Rourke began, his voice tight. The durable general power of attorney you granted your father was restricted to agricultural operations. However, the forensic audit confirms he bypassed those constraints. Over 18 months, $218,700 was diverted to service a home equity loan and gambling debts belonging to your brother. Evan, I leaned against the corrugated metal wall. I was not just funding a farm, I was underwriting a collapse. But the real threat was the primary residence, because Grant had diverted those funds. The mortgage had been neglected for 5 consecutive months. The bank had classified the loan as a non-performing note and was preparing to bundle it for a secondary market sale. I had to move faster than the foreclosure. Daniel, I said, we are not going to sue him yet. We are going to buy the debt. Under my direction, Rourke established Blue Ridge Asset Holdings, a limited liability company. I did not liquidate the trust's core holdings, which would have alerted Grant. Instead, I secured a securities-backed line of credit, collateralized against the $3,800,000 investment portfolio. With that liquidity, my shell company quietly purchased the non-performing mortgage note from the lender at a discounted rate. To the bank, it was a debt off their books. To me, it was the high ground. By the time I boarded my flight home, I was no longer just a daughter or a trustee. I was the secret owner of my parents' primary obligation. I was not reacting to a betrayal. I was shaping the battlefield. I signed the durable general power of attorney at my parents' kitchen table 3 days before my deployment. Grant had slid the document toward me with a pen already uncapped. It's just practical, he explained. You'll be overseas. Someone has to sign vendor contracts, approve equipment repairs, deal with payroll. I skimmed it. I remember that part clearly. I was tired. My bags were packed. My flight left at dawn. You're still the successor trustee, he assured me. This just lets me handle operational matters. Nothing more. Lydia poured coffee and set it beside me like this was a normal family morning. Sweetheart, we don't want you worrying about farm invoices while you're out there. I looked at the line that said Durable General Power of Attorney. It was broad. Broad enough that I hesitated. Grant noticed. You trust me, don't you? That question didn't feel like a trap at the time. I signed. The pen scratched across the page. He gathered the papers quickly. Too quickly. Maybe, back in the present, standing in that same dining room. I felt the weight of that moment press into my chest. Grant crossed his arms now, defensive instead of helpful. You gave me authority. For operational matters. I answered. Not for trust distributions. Not for brokerage liquidations. He shook his head. You were deployed. The family needed support. The trust needed stewardship. Lydia stepped between us slightly. Mara, you're making this sound criminal. Daniel's voice still echoed in my mind from the call weeks earlier. Authority under a power of attorney does not override fiduciary duty, he had said carefully. If your father used trust assets outside the scope of his authority, that is actionable. Actionable. Grant exhaled sharply. I kept this family afloat, with $218,700 of trust money. I replied. Silence followed that number. Evan, who had been leaning in the hallway, straightened. That wasn't all for me, he muttered. I looked at him, then explained the gambling transfers. His jaw tightened. No answer came. Grant's voice lowered. You're blowing this out of proportion. No, I said quietly. I'm reading the document the way a court would. The room didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a file waiting to be opened. Dr. Kessler did not retreat. He partially closed his leather folder, offering a calculated window of silence, but his thumb remained hovering over the screen of his phone. I want to be precise. Mara, Kessler said, his tone clinically detached. If I submit this sworn affidavit to the magistrate and it is signed, Law enforcement deputies will transport you for an involuntary evaluation before sunset. Under the North Carolina Emergency Commitment Statutes, this is a clinical intervention, not a debate. Grant moved toward the doctor, acting the part of the grieving, exhausted father. She has not slept in 48 hours. She is obsessive, paranoid, and fixated on financial ledgers. It is a textbook escalation of combat-related trauma. I did not flinch. I knew that in a courtroom. Silence is often more credible than a scream. I have been deployed for 5 years. My sleep cycles are regulated by mission parameters, not instability. Lydia joined them, her voice trembling with manufactured empathy. Mara, sweetheart, a 72-hour psychiatric hold is just a clinical reset. It is for your own safety. I looked at Kessler. A reset is what you do to a computer. Doctor, what you are describing is a deprivation of liberty based on a 10-minute observation. Kessler adjusted his glasses. Agitation and a defensive posture are sufficient for an emergency filing. I took a slow, measured breath. It was time to introduce the counterintelligence. Before you finalize that affidavit, Doctor, we need to discuss your professional exposure. I retained counsel 6 months ago to initiate a forensic audit. My attorney, Daniel Rourke, has already documented the $15,000 consulting fee my father transferred to your private practice from the Rotary Board's treasury last month. The air in the room solidified. Kessler's thumb froze. That was a legitimate professional engagement, Grant snapped, but his voice was an octave too high. It is a blatant conflict of interest, I replied, my voice flat. If you file a sworn affidavit to commit a successor trustee who is currently investigating your primary benefactor for a breach of fiduciary duty involving $218,700, the medical board will not see a diagnosis. They will see a conspiracy to obstruct justice. I set my tablet on the table, displaying a digitized copy of the notarized revocation of the durable general power of attorney. The authority you think you are acting under was terminated 42 days ago. Any attempt to use my military record to claim diminished capacity while I am uncovering a felony-level diversion of trust assets will result in a civil suit that will bankrupt your practice. Kessler looked at the screen, then at Grant. The calculation in his eyes shifted from predatory to self-preservation. He slipped his phone into his pocket and gathered his folder. I am not filing anything today, Kessler stated, his smooth voice finally cracking. The situation has been misrepresented. This requires an independent evaluation that I am no longer willing to provide. Grant's face turned a sickly shade of gray. You said this was a straightforward procedure. It is not, Kessler said sharply, heading for the door. I watched him leave. I had not won a war. I had simply neutralized a weapon. After Doctor, Kessler left. No one moved for a while. Grant stood by the window, hands on his hips. Lydia began stacking the untouched coffee cups like cleaning up could reset the afternoon. Evan disappeared down the hall and came back with his phone, not looking at anyone. I stayed at the table. I want to show you something, I said finally. Grant didn't turn around. You've shown enough. This isn't theater. I opened my tablet and pulled up the forensic report. Daniel had walked me through it line by line weeks ago. Now it felt different, heavier. The total diversion from trust distributions over 18 months is $218,700. Lydia let out a soft breath. That can't be right. It's documented. Transfers were made from the trust operating account into your personal account. Dad. Then from there to third parties. Grant pivoted toward me. For family expenses? For gambling settlements? I corrected. Evan stiffened. You don't know that. The transfers were traced to 2 online wagering platforms. Daniel subpoenaed transaction histories. You subpoenaed me. Evan's voice cracked slightly. It hasn't been filed yet. Grant stepped closer to the table. You had no right to dig into private matters. As successor trustee, I have a duty to review distributions. You were overseas. That doesn't suspend fiduciary duty. Lydia's hands trembled as she set down a plate. We were under pressure. The farm needed repairs. Evan was going through something. I scrolled to the next page. This payment, $42,000, labeled equipment replacement. It went directly toward the home equity loan. Grant's eyes flicked across the screen. He knew that line. That loan kept the house stable. For 5 months. You didn't make the mortgage payment at all. Evan looked up sharply. What? The primary mortgage has been delinquent for 5 consecutive months. The lender classified it as non-performing. Grant's face went pale for a second, then hardened again. That's temporary. It triggered foreclosure preparation. Lydia sat down slowly. You never told me that. Grant snapped back at her. I was handling it. I looked at him steadily. By using trust assets to patch holes while the structure was failing. He shook his head. You're twisting it. I'm reading it. Evan ran a hand through his hair. This is insane. No, I said quietly. This is accounting. The room felt smaller now, not because anyone raised their voice, but because the numbers were on the table. Specific. Recorded. Hard to argue with. Grant leaned forward, palms flat against the wood. You think a report changes the fact that this is our home? I met his eyes. It changes who owes what. Grant remained standing, but the aggressive tilt of his shoulders had vanished, replaced by a rigid, guarded tension. He stared at the documents on the mahogany table as if they were unexploded ordnance. You are talking like a liquidator, not a daughter, he muttered, his voice raspy. Today, the roles are identical, I replied. I slid a heavy linen paper document across the table. The embossed header was unmistakable Blue Ridge Asset Holdings, Limited Liability Company. He glanced at the name, then back at me, his eyes narrowing in confusion. What is this some shell company? This is the official assignment of the mortgage note. I answered, my voice steady. Specifically, the primary mortgage on this estate, the one you allowed to fall into delinquency for 5 consecutive months while you were diverting trust funds to cover Evan's losses. Grant's face hardened. The bank owns that lien. Mara, you cannot just invent ownership. The bank bundled your default into a secondary market sale. Because the loan was classified as a non-performing note, they were eager to offload the risk. My commercial broker negotiated the purchase 30 days before my discharge. 100% of the debt is now held by my firm. Evan let out a short, hollow laugh. You are joking. You bought our house. I did not buy the house. Evan, I purchased the obligation. There is a profound legal difference. I turned back to my father. I did not utilize the core trust principle for this acquisition. I utilized accumulated dividend distributions and a securities-backed line of credit, collateralized against the $3,800,000 brokerage portfolio. The Whitaker Trust remains protected. You, however, do not. Lydia's hand trembled as she touched the edge of the paper. Mara, even if you own the debt, you cannot just throw us out. Actually, as the holder of the mortgage note, I have the right to enforce every covenant you breached, given the 5-month default. I am exercising the right of acceleration. The entire outstanding balance is now due immediately. Evan leaned forward, his face pale. Acceleration. What does that mean? It means the full $392,000 is owed by the end of business today, since you cannot service that debt. I have the standing to initiate an immediate foreclosure. The room went cold. Grant's chest rose and fell in shallow heaves. This is blackmail. This is accounting, I corrected. I placed a second document on the table, a voluntary vacate agreement. You have 14 days to relocate. If you sign, I will refrain from filing a civil complaint for the breach of fiduciary duty and will withhold the forensic evidence from the district attorney regarding your misuse of the durable general power of attorney. If you stay until the 15th day, I will pursue every criminal and civil avenue available. Grant looked at the pen, then at me. For the first time, he looked small. You would destroy your own father's reputation for a ledger. You destroyed it yourself. I said, I am just the one who audited the wreckage. The house went quiet after that. Not the kind of quiet that comes with peace. The kind that settles in when everyone is calculating. Grant didn't argue anymore. He moved differently, slower, measured. Lydia started sorting through drawers the next morning, stacking old mail into neat piles like order could soften what was happening. Evan avoided eye contact for 2 days. Then he cornered me near the back porch. You're serious about the district attorney part. Yes. He rubbed his face with both hands. It wasn't supposed to spiral like this. It didn't spiral. It was a series of choices. He looked past me toward the barn. Dad thought he could fix it before you noticed. I noticed. 4 days later, Grant asked to speak privately. We sat at the same dining table where the affidavit had almost been filed. You'll really foreclose, he said quietly. If you refuse to sign. He studied the agreement again. 14 days? Yes. And no civil complaint. Not immediately. He nodded once. No apology. No admission. Just recognition. On the 12th day, cardboard boxes lined the hallway. Lydia wrapped plates in newspaper. Evan loaded the truck without speaking. The morning of the 14th day, Grant signed. The pen pressed harder than it needed to. He slid the document back across the table. You win. I shook my head. This isn't about winning. He didn't answer. When they drove away, the gravel under the tires sounded louder than usual. I stood in the doorway until the dust settled. The house didn't feel reclaimed. It felt emptied. I didn't go to New York right away. I stayed on the farm for 3 more days, walked the fence line, checked irrigation valves, signed vendor invoices myself. Normal things, quiet things. Then I drove north. The brownstone in Brooklyn Heights looked smaller than I remembered. Brick front, narrow steps, 4 units stacked vertically like compartments in a file cabinet. The property manager, a woman named Alina, met me at the door. You must be Mara, she said, offering a quick handshake. We've kept everything current. Tenants are stable. No major repairs pending. Thank you. She handed me a ring of keys. Heavy. Real. Let me know if you want to occupy the garden unit or keep it rented. I'll stay in it. I replied. Alina nodded once and left me alone in the entryway. The place smelled faintly like cleaning solution and old wood. Not sentimental. Just maintained. I carried 1 suitcase downstairs and set it against the wall. No furniture yet. Just hardwood floors and a small window facing the street. I sat on the floor for a minute. No one was watching. No one waiting for an explanation. No one calculating what they could access. My phone buzzed once. A message from Daniel. Documents recorded. You're clear. I typed back. Thank you. Then I lay down on the bare floor with my jacket under my head. The city noise outside felt distant but steady. Not threatening, just present. For the first time in months, nothing needed defending. 2 weeks after I moved into the garden unit, I flew back to North Carolina with a different purpose. Not to confront anyone, not to reclaim anything, to restructure. I met with the farm managers in the old equipment shed, folding chairs, coffee and paper cups. I'm not selling, I told them, but we're changing how this operates. Tom, who had worked the North Field for almost 20 years, leaned back in his chair, changing how full financial transparency, independent bookkeeping, quarterly external reviews. He blinked once, like an audit. Yes. The word didn't scare me anymore. Later that afternoon, I sat with Daniel over a video call. I'm filing paperwork to establish the Whitaker Asset Protection Initiative. I told him, nonprofit status. Yes, educational and legal defense funding for veterans facing financial exploitation. He nodded. We'll need bylaws, board members, compliance structure. I want it clean. No gray areas. Back in Brooklyn, I met with Alina again. The rental income will fund part of the initiative. I explained. She folded her arms. You're turning this into something bigger. I'm trying to... That night, alone in the brownstone, I drafted the mission statement on my laptop. Forensic Financial Reviews. Education on durable general power of attorney misuse. Grants for veterans caught in civil disputes over trust administration. It wasn't dramatic. No press release, no ribbon cutting, just paperwork. The kind that protects instead of traps. I saved the document and closed the screen. This time, the numbers on the page didn't feel like a threat. They felt structured. I went back to Blue Ridge in late autumn, not to inspect anything, not to correct anyone, just to walk. The orchard was quieter without machinery running. Leaves had already fallen from most of the trees. The air felt thinner than I remembered, or maybe I just wasn't carrying as much. I stopped near the old oak at the edge of the property, the same place my grandfather used to stand with his hands behind his back, surveying everything like it was both fragile and permanent. I brought one document with me, the revoked durable general power of attorney. I unfolded it slowly. My signature looked younger, less guarded. For a minute I just held it. Grant had called once, about 3 weeks after they left. This didn't have to go that far. He had said, it already had. He didn't argue. Neither did I. Standing there, I thought about that conversation, not with anger, just distance. I didn't burn the document. I didn't tear it. I slipped it back into a folder and carried it to the farmhouse office. There's a fireproof archive cabinet in the corner. I unlocked it and filed the paper behind the trust amendments and the revocation notice. Evidence belongs in records, not in flames. Before I closed the drawer, I rested my hand on the metal edge. I used to think protecting something meant absorbing the damage, taking the hit so the structure stayed standing. That's what I did for years. With the trust, with the farm, with my family. Mara Ellison believed loyalty meant endurance. It took a breach of fiduciary duty and an attempted involuntary commitment for me to see the difference between loyalty and liability. Now I understand something simpler. I am not responsible for maintaining systems that depend on my silence. The farm will keep running. The brownstone will keep paying for the initiative. The Whitaker Asset Protection Initiative is already reviewing its third case. I locked the cabinet and stepped outside. This is where I leave it. If you're still here, listening, thank you for staying with it. Not for the outcome, for the process. And then I drove back down the mountain.